Hello, my name is John Stoltz, Director of Conferences and Events for APICS, and I will be your host for today's webinar, Building an End-to-End Supply Chain, Berry Plastics Case Study. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few logistical details with you. At the end of the presentation, we will save time for a question and answer session. If you look at the right toolbar on your screen, you will see a questions box. To ask your question, simply type it in the designated box and select Send Question to send at any time during the presentation. For today's webinar, I'm pleased to be joined by Christine Barnhart. Christine is the Global Process Owner and Supply Chain for Berry Global, a producer of protective packaging that generated $7.1 billion in sales in fiscal 2017. Christine has a diverse background in supply chain with extensive experience in plant operations, strategic planning, and global procurement across consumer packaging, pharmaceutical, and appliance industries. Christine's presentation content today was also featured at APICS 2017, the premier supply chain conference for end-to-end supply chain education. The APICS annual conference features exceptional content covering all areas of the value chain, which makes it the perfect destination for all supply chain professionals. We're also excited to share that Christine will again be joining us for APICS 2018 in Chicago with an all-new educational session on the power of the pilot, how a proof of concept can help you build momentum for change. We're delighted to share such exceptional insights and learnings with the APICS community, and it is now my pleasure to present Christine.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with everyone this morning. Thank you so much for the introduction. As you stated, we're going to talk about what Berry has been doing the last 3 to 4 years in terms of really maturing their end-to-end supply chain. So in terms of an agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the challenges have been, and then we'll segue into what the approach has been for Berry. Hopefully everyone can gather some nuggets or some tidbits that might help you on your own supply chain maturity journey. And then we'll talk about where our results have been to date. And then hopefully we'll leave some time here at the end for questions. So a little bit about my background. I think you guys did a great job of introducing, but I think it's important to understand I've only been with Berry for 3 years. I started in the Integrated Supply Chain Center of Excellence. I recently transitioned into IMS as the Global Process Owner of Supply Chain. And I think that that's important because what Berry's done is really leverage both internal subject matter experts and then external experts such as myself to do a really comprehensive assessment of what their needs are. And I think that that's important anytime you're starting a journey of this nature. So in terms of Berry's background, we are a very large, diverse manufacturer of protective packaging and protective packaging solutions. We are global in nature, although you will notice that we are very North America centric. We have a lot of growth outside of North America right now, but we still tend to be centered in the US, Canada, and Mexico. We have a large customer base, over 19,000 customers, over 24,000 employees. We produce actively over 92,000 SKUs a year. So we're larger than what most people would really know. In terms of our business structure, we have 3 primary divisions, roughly equal in size or in terms of revenue. One is our health, hygiene, and specialty. You may hear me utilize the acronym HH&S. As with all companies of this size, we're very acronym-centric. So health, hygiene, and specialty, when you think maybe the backing for baby diapers, wipes, dryer sheets, other non-woven or filtration media type structures. We're probably best known for consumer packaging, which is where our heritage is. We were started in the 60s as an injection molding house, so bottles, closures, lids, other types of containers. And then finally, our engineered materials division, which is where we produce tapes. We're actually one of the largest producers of duct tape, as an example, in North America, stretch wrap, various agricultural films, trash bags and trash liners. So a very diverse product offering across multiple segments, multiple industries. And what really ties that all together is that the raw material basic structure, if you will, for all of these products is resin. So if it is produced in some fashion leveraging plastic, leveraging resin, Berry probably has their fingers in it, quite frankly. We have an acquisition track record. So we've had 44 acquisitions since 1988. I would say M&A is definitely a core competency of Berry. Just since I've been here, I started in July of 2015. We've had 5 major acquisitions. We've integrated, those businesses into the Berry family, if you will, very, very quickly. And all of that means we have a very diverse customer base. So for everybody on the call, these are probably names, brands, companies that you recognize. And all of them are part of Berry's customer base. And because we do such a wide range of products, I think you can start to see, we're playing in automotive, we're playing in pharmaceutical, fast-moving consumer goods, really a very large swath of businesses that we're serving as either a tier 1 or tier 2 supplier. So what does that mean? It means that Berry's core challenge is complexity. Our complexity is increasing. The number of customers that we service is increasing. The number of products and the markets that we're doing business in is increasing. Our employee base has increased significantly, as is the number of primary packaging or primary machines and locations. So 130 locations manufacturing around the world now. And all of that means more complex business processes and tools. So our challenge really has been to find solutions that address all of the variable complexities that are impacting our business, or what we would term the end-to-end supply chain. So now we get into the good part, right, is what is the approach? So first and foremost, I think it's important that you define what the end-to-end supply chain is. Everybody has a little bit different definition. We all have different connotations about, what it really means to mature the supply chain. For us at Berry, one of the first things we started with was the supply chain insights end-to-end supply chain maturity model. And what that model says is that the end-to-end supply chain is the management of the flow of products, cash, and information, and it's from the customer's customer to the supplier's supplier, as defined by our individual business strategy. And what we see is that most companies talk end-to-end, but it's really within their 4 walls. And that's an inside-out mentality. It doesn't really leverage the customer, the market, and it really results in a lot of missed opportunities. So we at Berry have been very focused on that outside-in mentality. We know that we need to improve our transactional efficiency, particularly order to cash and procure to pay. Once we have better transactional efficiency, we can start then to move up the end-to-end supply chain maturity model into better data sharing, whether that be EDI or other, business networks, channel data, forecast and marketing plans, policy, whether we're doing some type of, supplier development program with our suppliers or with our customers, but really understanding the governance models and the policies that we're utilizing to leverage our business. Finally, moving into the realm of relationships and joint development, co-locating with suppliers, and then what I would call like supply chain maturity nirvana, which is joint value. It's being that trusted partner, co-marketing, being on the ground floor in terms of redesigns and things of that nature. The other thing that we did once we defined what supply chain was for Berry is we did a large-scale assessment of what our supply chain looked like. Current state was such that we had multiple planning systems, widespread Excel usage, off-platform manual efforts. I call this like that kind of Excel hell, right? Where we have things in planning systems, but then we pull it out of the system, we're modeling, we're doing things outside of our standard platforms. A lot of highly customized programs and integrations, inconsistent processes and tools for supply and production planning, and really overall a lack of predictable controlled results. How did we find all that out, right? Because that's a lot of information. We actually leveraged Gartner's supply chain demand-driven value network, so the DDVN. So we did an assessment. We actually hired some consultants to help us. We looked internally from our supply chain experts, and we quantified where we were, which was somewhere between react and anticipate. And based on what we knew from the end-to-end supply chain maturity model and the DDVN, we knew that there were multiple benefits from a maturity standpoint. We knew that being more mature would help us better leverage our size and our scale, right? It would give us efficiencies and help us from a standardization and consistency standpoint. It would help us be a more reliable partner to our customers, and honestly supports better future mergers and acquisitions, right? So if everybody at Berry is doing something in a similar way, it makes it much, much easier to onboard new businesses because there really is a Berry way, a Berry standard, if you will. So, I think our target was to move from reacting and anticipating to a future where we're integrating and collaborating, which allows us then to adopt this outside-in mindset that supports optimization and scalability. And I think it's important to understand as part of this, we did this internal assessment, and that's really what I'm going to focus on today, but we also partnered with Supply Chain Insights and did an external assessment. They actually asked our customers, what are the things that are important? And I think everyone within Berry was really surprised to learn that price was not the #1 driver. In fact, price was not even the #2 driver. From my perspective, I would say price is an order qualifier in our business. It is not an order winner. What we found is that quality was the #1 consideration and reliability was the #2 consideration. I think by and large within Berry, we understand quality manufacturing as our core, but reliability was one of those areas where everybody's definition is a little bit different. And so through this process of assessing our supply chain and really moving to a more mature end-to-end supply chain, we truly believe it helps us from a reliability standpoint, in addition from optimizing our business and helping us to reduce our cost structure and therefore supporting that price requirement as an order qualifier. Okay, so one of the things that Berry did soon after completing the DDVN and understanding, I guess, recognizing this understanding that they needed to improve their business was to create centralized centers of excellence, or COEs, to support the business units, of which I was a part of that. So we did the DDVN in 2014. We started to scale up these COEs, or centers of excellences, in 2015. And the purpose of the COE was really to focus resources on finding, developing, and sustaining these standard business processes and practices that drive value. And one of the beauties of a COE is that the members step out of the execution role. You know, as we said in the introduction, my background is operations. I spent 12 years with Whirlpool in various operations roles. When you're the process engineer on the plant floor, if something is broken, you're on the floor fixing it. And while there's maybe great opportunity to do research and to bring together compatriots to determine best practice, your primary function is to get a piece of equipment running on the field. Or to, you know, if I'm a supply chain manager, my primary function is to make sure that I'm servicing the customer. So that's really one of the beauties of a COE, is that you're bringing people into this role that understand the business, but that are not directly tied to the day-to-day execution of what your business is producing. Resources are dedicated. So all of us within the COE, dedicated resources, it really allowed us to have a single set of priorities and produce results at a much higher rate than what we would have been able to do if I was a resource that was maybe just 20%, right, dedicated to this special project. And then finally, we were able to create this repeatable approach, this well-honed process. And honestly, I think that is what we're going to focus on at the APICS conference in October, right? It's talking about, well, how did we use that approach in terms of pilots then to really advance this overall, you know, research or proof of concept for our supply chain. So in terms of, you know, what this centralized COE looks like, we really established best practices, we established standards, we are the program or the project leaders, and then we're partnering with the business, because the business becomes the implementation experts. They become the subject matter experts for whatever these processes are. It becomes very important that we're collaborating effectively so that we understand maybe the unique requirements for a specific division or a specific set of plants based on their customers and things of that nature. So one of the things that we did within Berry is we actually stood up 3 centers of excellences. One was integrated planning, of which I was a member. One was warehousing and transportation operations, and then the third was customer service, all housed within the supply chain umbrella and reporting directly into the Chief Supply Chain Officer, which was the Executive Vice President of Supply Chain. So all of this then brought us to this ability to create a vision for Berry's supply chain. We understood where we were, which was not as strong in terms of transactional efficiency, data sharing, react, anticipate, very commodity focused, really easily replaced to some extent by our customers, and with this inside out mindset to where we knew we wanted to be in the future. We want to be a trusted partner. We want to provide value. We want to have these relationships and leverage joint value in this integrate and collaborate space. So from that, we actually created a transformation message, if you will, called Steps to Success. And Steps to Success really provided the foundation to mature the overall supply chain through these focused projects in individual areas. That Steps to Success message is really embodied in the roadmap that you see on slide 16. So this is the roadmap for Berry's integrated supply chain transformation. As I said, we like acronyms. So STEPS is an acronym for Streamline, Transform, Enable, and Pursue. So, you know, pursue excellence, pursue, you know, better customer service, pursue this whole bevy of improvements, customer experience and service levels and working capital efficiency and reducing our errors and things of that nature. And all of that is supported by 4 key pillars. One is integrated planning, really tasked with streamlining demand, supply, inventory planning processes, along with creating this demand-driven raw material planning and procurement process, all of which is really supported by sales and operations planning. The next pillar is customer interfaces, so standardizing how we actually interact with our customers, increasing our electronic transactions, creating segmentation strategy and role alignment. The third pillar, warehousing and transportation operations, so standardizing the use of existing tools, evaluating the benefits of a warehouse management system, optimizing our processes and our footprints, and then finally, things in the enable bucket, which is really supply chain systems, right? So simplifying our processes, streamlining and automating systems, improving our overall governance and management, and then deploying technology where it can really benefit our company. Okay, so that's the roadmap. The roadmap is really supported by the portfolio. So this is the workhorse, if you will, for getting things done and really progressing the supply chain, right? So the mission, scale and transform the end-to-end supply chain to drive customer satisfaction through process excellence. And I think it's really important that when you have a transformation on this scale, it affects all divisions, multiple processes within supply chain, large investment. It becomes really important that you have a mission, you have a rallying cry. Everybody has this elevator speech, if you will, around what it is you're trying to accomplish. If we break that down then, with an integrated planning, these are some of the key projects then that we resource. So we have this portfolio. The portfolio is supported by these pillars, or if you like the project management terminology, program, right? Integrated planning is a program, and that program is supported by multiple projects. So as I said, S&OP, demand and supply planning, vendor managed inventory as an example. Customer interfaces, again, supported by multiple projects that help us mature our end-to-end supply chain. The same with warehousing and transportation operations, and then supply chain systems. And for supply chain systems, you notice it says like JDE enhancements. There's something like 13 individual projects within that bucket. In the essence of having a slide that isn't too busy, we kind of put it all together into these JDE enhancements. All of these together form the integrated supply chain project portfolio. And this is really what has enabled us to mature our supply chain at Berry over the last 2 years. So getting into, just a little bit more detail. So, pulling back the layer, if you will, for this onion, if we talk about customer interfaces, some key goals: standardizing, increasing those electronic transactions, creating this segmentation strategy, and then applying it in terms of roles. You can see there's 3 main projects, right? So from an EDI standpoint, we're trying to reduce touches. And so by doing that, we also reduce errors, right? So our goal was to be at 60% of our orders electronically entered, right? And doing that through traditional EDI, through leverage of our partnership with Elimica, through some direct online customer entry portal type methodologies. Also then, really standing up document management. So I was really surprised to learn that within our customer service group, when they had conversations with customers, especially if those conversations were via email or even through fax, they would print it off, they would scan it to a PDF, and then it would go into an electronic file cabinet on somebody's desktop or maybe in a shared drive. It was very, very difficult to retrieve that information. It was very, very time consuming to create it and store it. So we actually implemented a document management system that allows us to do that all electronically with a touch of a button. Gives us much better ability then to store that information, make it accessible to multiple stakeholders within customer service, and quite frankly is a huge savings in terms of manpower in having to print and scan and keep track of these types of documents. And then similar to that, a new contract management system. So previously, Barry's contracts were all done via paper. The workflow process might have been partly email, partly paper, a lot of inconsistency from division to division, and all of that now going into a contract management system. Key message around this is we believe that these projects improve the overall customer experience. We also believe that it helps drive cross-functional efficiencies and helps us adhere to processes which are really critical to the overall success of Berry Global. From a warehousing and operations standpoint, the purpose of WMS, or this warehouse management system, was really to identify and deploy this best-in-class business process and tool in order to drive efficiencies within our warehouse. From a transportation optimization standpoint, really reducing overall freight expenses through automatic consolidations and multi-stop consolidation. So a lot of manual processes moving to automation. It really supports robust change management, process standardization, and then adoption of best practices that are really necessary to drive maximum value within our business. From a supply chain system standpoint, all focused around reducing inefficiencies that result from what was our current JDE World setup, a confirmation, and then reducing this new process to port to JDE E1. So we're reducing touches, we're moving to a more standardized process. Some key areas that we focused on were eliminating the manual release shipping, automatic order promise dates. This was another area that I was really surprised when I came to Berry. If you were a customer and you called for a date, in a lot of our businesses, it was completely a negotiation every time that you called. And having been a customer of Berry in procurement, as an example, it's one of those areas where I was like, absolutely unacceptable, guys. People want to program us in their ERP system, based on a standard lead time, and they don't really want to have to think about it again. So automatic order promise date is really industry ATP. The addition of freight charges to invoices, automatically generating invoices. So, these areas really focused on, data, master data, transactional data, making sure we understood what that data needed to be, providing training, and then really a lot of effort on change management in making sure that everybody within our customer service and supply chain organizations understood how we were going to support this automation in terms of master data and tools. And then finally, the work stream or pillar that's the nearest and dearest to my heart, which is integrated planning. So standardizing our demand and supply planning processes, doing demand-driven raw material planning and procurement. So this was another area that I was really surprised when I came to Berry, that we were purchasing raw material not based on an approved demand planning process, but based on historical consumption, because we didn't have the tools in place to really support our business in a manner that supported S&OP. So, when you talk about or think about this as-is process, when I started at Berry, multiple demand signals driving the business, WIP and raw material forecasts not being generated holistically, and raw materials being purchased based on this historical usage, to the to-be process, which is actually where we are today, an S&OP approved one number forecast that's generated through a standard tool, WIP and raw material requirements generated again through a standard advanced planning tool, and this authorization to purchase based on an S&OP approved supply plan. The benefits here are really multiple, right? reduced inventory investment, both from the Berry side, but also from our customer side. If we're a more reliable partner, then our customers don't have to maintain as much inventory, and we understand that, right? But it also then helps us to improve our manufacturing efficiency, helps us to make better data-driven decisions. And one of the key messages that we've had internally for this pillar and really for all the projects is we can't just buy a tool. We have to improve both the business process and the supporting tools in order to really achieve maximum benefit. So where does all of that take us? I said that, you know, these projects together work cohesively to move us to a more mature end-to-end supply chain. So if we map those in the buckets that we think that they support, the JDE enhancements absolutely allow us to better react and anticipate our customer needs. It really is all about transactional efficiency. So is the warehouse management system. When we talk about these contract management and document management and EDI, that's really all about data sharing. It helps us to anticipate and be more integrated to our customers. Pretty much everything within the integrated planning bucket, S&OP, demand planning, supply planning, they're really all focused on policy. Policy and governance helps us to be more integrated. And then vendor management, inventory, transportation, optimization, very much focused on relationships, building better relationships, collaborating, integrating with our customers. All of this then really helps Berry increase the overall supply chain maturity. We think it improves customer satisfaction and it supports increased profitability overall. So what's our progress to date? From a customer interfaces standpoint, 2 of 3 businesses are live. The last business is kind of in their onboarding stage, if you will. From a document management standpoint, all sites are live. We're moving to a Tableau dashboard to help us monitor this better. From an EDI standpoint, we're a little above 50%. Our goal was to be at 60%. So we're in this continuous improvement. We're looking for opportunities within our customer base to really increase our EDI. From a supply chain system standpoint, all sites are live on the JDE improvements, and we've moved to continuous improvement. When we get into this integrated planning bucket, all sites are live on demand planning. So again, we're now in this continuous improvement phase. From a supply and demand planning standpoint, everyone has now adopted the new advanced planning models, and we're trying now to really focus more of our effort then on the S&OP side. So one of our key learnings has been we had to stand up demand planning before we could stand up supply planning, and then once we stood up supply planning, we could stand up sales and operations planning, but it really had to be in that sequential format because without it, we didn't have the data that we needed to support those activities. From a finite planning standpoint, we've completed an RFP and software selection, and we're actually moving into the design test phase overall for that particular project. Okay, so I've taken 35 minutes, so I'm right on time. Now we can open the floor for questions if anybody has them.
Great, thank you, Christine, and super insightful information again. So we'd like to give our audience community of participants the chance to ask any questions. As a reminder, please click on the Q&A tab on the side of your screen, enter your question, and then click Ask. So we'll wait for just a moment for those questions to come in. Great. Okay, so Christine, you mentioned the acquisition kind of history or track record of Berry. With the implementation of these new processes and procedures, how do you see that impacting timing for future integrations?
Yeah, we believe that it actually helps us accelerate the timeline for integration, and there's a couple of key key reasons. One is it expands our subject matter expert base, right? Where previously we had SMEs within each division, but they couldn't actually work cross-divisionally because the business processes and the tools were not consistent. By moving to a more standardized, business process, more standardized process flows, more standardized tools, it actually gives us more SMEs to work with. So we can deploy more into the field whenever we start to do integrations. The other thing that it does is we're starting to move our vernacular, if you will, and our business processes closer to what we would call industry standards. So we leverage APICS a ton. We're moving to the APICS 4 definitions and model, and so we feel like it really helps us then talk better, if you will, to the companies that we're purchasing, to the employees, and it really helps us then also as we're trying to hire talent as well. So we think there's a lot of advantages there from an M&A standpoint.
Great, thanks. Next question. So how did Barry manage the backfill or the expense for those people who became those dedicated resources for your centers of excellence?
So actually the COEs, based on the benefit analysis, they were funded as a separate entity, right? So they actually, came out of the day-to-day budget, and a new budget was actually set up. So I do think it's important that people understand that you don't do a transformation on this scale without really understanding the ROI, right? So there was a lot of analysis around, what is all of this going to cost? We have resources that we have to hire, we have consultants that we have to hire, things of that nature. So, we had a completely separate budget for the centers of excellence. In addition to that, then there were resources within each of the divisions that had some percentage of their time that was also dedicated to the transformation.
Great. Next up, can you speak to how the company manages global supply chain risk, and then specifically, is there a system or tool in place that manages that?
Yeah, I think that's an area probably for improvement for us as we move forward in terms of global supply chain risk tools. Specifically, we are a standardized ERP predominantly for North America. As we start to go outside of North America, we see much more variation in our tool set. We see more variation in our processes, more variation in how the various businesses are identifying and mitigating risk. So I think for Barry, it's probably the next realm of opportunity. For us, the initial part of our transformation has been more about really getting to kind of a industry standard, and then now moving to best in class. Not that we weren't a great company before, because I think we were, but we just weren't all talking the same language, and we were doing things in a lot of different ways. I think the one area where we're very good from a risk identification standpoint is specifically within the sourcing bucket, and that's because sourcing is a centralized function for us. So where supply chain is more decentralized, sourcing is very centralized, and they have a pretty rigorous methodology. Even with that, I think there's always room for improvement. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but feel free to contact me and we can talk about it more.
Great. Just a follow-up then from another attendee on a similar topic. So how do you accommodate risk mitigation buffering into your one plan demand from the S&OP process? Yeah,
I think from our standpoint, risk mitigation is predominantly centered around inventory, right? So if you think about Barry, 80% of our spend is in resin. Much of the time, the supplier of that resin is not someone that we're selecting, but someone that our customers are selecting for us based on their needs or based on, what they've qualified in the past. So I think from our standpoint, a lot of what we do in terms of risk is then trying to manage inventory. So we're putting in buffer stock, we're putting in transportation stock. I mean, most of our resin travels via rail, so we have 2 weeks generally in transit at any one time, and that's actually worked favorably for us. I mean, we saw, while we did have some interruptions in our business due to the hurricanes over the last couple of years, significantly less interruptions for us than for some of our peers, because we were choosing to make investments up front in order to mitigate those risks.
Great. Next question. Which step of the process took the longest time to be achieved, and why?
Honestly, I think the upfront work of assessing and then figuring out what projects would move us probably took the most time, right? So a year of dedicated resources and consultants evaluating at a very granular level where the opportunities were within Berry, right? And then going out and finding resources that had the subject matter expertise to evaluate and implement at a strategic level various improvement projects. So, a year and a half investment before we even started to actually implement projects and could then start to reap rewards and benefits. So, I'm a professional project manager, and we often say that, the biggest work that's most often, I think, overlooked is all that planning that has to happen up front, because if you don't do a good job up front, you're not going to do a good job on the execution at the end. And so a lot of effort, a year and a half of effort, just really figuring out what the requirements were, what we thought the benefits would be, what the deliverables were, and all those types of activities.
Great, thanks, Christine. Next up, what are the key change management challenges that you faced so far in the journey?
There are many. We could have a whole discussion, I think, just about that. I think, based on what I've seen since I've been here, I think there's a lot of ambiguity still around what supply chain is, what supply chain does, and why I should care if I'm an executive. So I think that there were hurdles in that kind of avenue. We were very lucky. We had a strong leader who had a considerable amount of credibility within the organization that enabled us to overcome some of that. But I can tell you, one of my key learnings, or the key learnings for the project team, was that we did not do a good job throughout this project of communicating where we were, what was happening, and then what the benefits were as we brought these various projects online. So, that's something as we move forward, and we're doing assessments now to determine, do we need to do, another big leap in terms of supply chain transformation, or should we just do continuous improvement? I mean, we're in this assessment period right now. If you think about this in terms of like Six Sigma Black Belt and the DMAIC model, right? So I think from a change management standpoint, I think it's really been having a clear message, making sure that we're reiterating that message, keeping the projects visible, because we kind of went off as a project team into our little project realm, and then the business is sitting off to the side going, well, what's happening? You're not telling me what's happening. I don't know where you are. So I think just, being very, very verbal, very communicative, which for a lot of us is a challenge, right? I'm an engineer. That's not necessarily one of my core strengths. It's something I've had to learn to do, as I've matured in business.
Great. Next, was there any consideration of separating the procurement area as a separate function outside of integrated planning?
That's an interesting question. What I will tell you is Berry is a distributed matrix organization. And what that really means for us is that while we had for this development a centralized COE, in terms of executive level integration, we have a separate executive officer for operations, for procurement, and then for supply chain. So supply chain historically within Berry, I would say, would be more traditionally defined as planning. I think for these projects, we very quickly understood that without demand and supply planning, you can't do procurement planning, right? I have to understand what my customer demand is and what it is I'm planning to produce, or I don't know what I need to buy. So that was the reason we put procurement under the integrated planning umbrella. I think it supports APICS score saying that, you know, sourcing is part of supply chain. Plan, source, make, deliver, right? And so I think it's very difficult to separate that. It had been separated as an organization, and I think that that was part of the reason that they were purchasing based on historical demand and not purchasing based on this, you know, bottoms up kind of evaluation of what we were actually planning to produce and what we needed in the plan.
Great, thanks. So Berry is obviously a large global enterprise. What key points do you think would be most applicable for small and medium-sized businesses?
I honestly think that this whole strategy is applicable regardless of what you produce, whether it's a service or whether it's a physical product. And by that, what I mean is that, number one, you have to recognize that you have a supply chain, and that regardless of where you are, your supply chain has the opportunity to improve and to provide better value to your company. And I think there's a plethora of tools that are out there to help you evaluate, but you have to, you know, take the time. It's sometimes challenging, it's hard, it's difficult to get people engaged in surveys and assessments, but it's absolutely critical. If I'm in, you know, Indiana and I want to go to Europe, and I Google that and I go into Google Maps, you know, I have to know where I'm starting, and then I can figure out multiple methodologies to get there, right? But if I don't know where I start, it's kind of a free-for-all, and I don't think you're going to be very efficient, and you're probably not going to get the results that you want. So I think that regardless of the business and regardless of the size, you have to take the time and the effort to pull people out of their daily execution role and have them do those really hard assessments about where are you today, and then strategically, where do you want to be? And then you can start to figure out what are the tools and the projects and the processes that get you there.
Great. Next up, do you couple your supply chain roadmap with a data and analytics strategy to bring any additional insights and gain competitive advantage?
That's an excellent question, and as I said earlier, we're in the middle of doing assessments for, you know, kind of the next phase in Berry's maturity, and we've already pointed out and recognized that we will have a supply chain roadmap, if you will, that is coupled to our digitalization roadmap. And that digitalization roadmap is more holistic. It includes other areas within the company and how the analytics really kind of cross paths. But absolutely, we think that data analytics, the ability to gain insights and put them into practice from that is a competitive advantage for the company. For steps, we really kind of had everything tied together. We didn't call digitalization out as a separate entity. We believe now that it's important that we do that. and that it's important that our executives understand that we're attacking people, process, and tools, and how those really go across, all of the functions, those multiple entities.
Great. Next up, what percentage of the implementation was done by internal versus external or consultancy resources?
Yeah, that's a great question. This would be a swag at best. So I would say probably 80% was internal, 20% was external. So in terms of implementation, now assessment, the upfront part, probably closer to 50-50. But once we assessed where we were and started to identify projects, the design, capturing benefits and opportunities for improvement and specifications, and then actually implementing those designs was generally more led internally. We did have some consultants, external partners, specifically helping us more on the tool side. But a large part of this implementation, this maturity, if you will, transformation, was really business process oriented. The tool support, but creating a blueprint for how you want to run your business really is a prerequisite.
Great. Next up, so how was the VMI adoption and how was the vendor commitment to the project?
Can you repeat, because you cut out at the beginning of the question?
I'm sorry. So how was the VMI adoption and how was the vendor commitment to it?
Yeah, so VMI is interesting. We actually had tools in-house that we weren't leveraging, that we identified, so we didn't have to do new tool selection. We really just had to bring in some experts from the tool vendor themselves to say, well, how do we better leverage this tool? How do we get more out of the tool that we already own? In terms of adoption, we actually have been the entity that has put brakes on things, to be honest. So our partner, in terms of the pilots for VMI, was like, let's go, let's roll this out everywhere. And Barry has been the one being a little bit more conservative. So I think, for us, we were really looking for companies to partner with that we knew had mature supply chains, that we felt we could learn something from, that we were doing enough business with, that it made sense for us to have this type of a relationship. I mean, there was a number of selection criteria that we looked at. And then we also looked at, there were businesses that were, kind of raising their hands saying, we want to have a better partnership with you. We want to collaborate more, which made it easy then. So we checked the boxes off on our end and saw who, was in that group. And then there were already customers there that were asking for this.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Christine. So that's all the time we have today for questions. Again, we'd like to thank Christine for her time and great insights that she shared with us today. Christine, if you could advance to the next slide. We do look forward to seeing everyone at APICS 2018 in Chicago from September 30th through October 2nd. So it's going to be another can't miss event with exceptional content. I mentioned Christine's got a great new session on the power of the pilot, how a proof of concept can help you build momentum for change, as well as a number of other world-class speakers and plenty of opportunities to connect with new people and expand your network. As an added bonus, attendees of today's webinar will receive a special discount offer. Save an additional $50 on your full conference registration when you use promo code CHWEB50. The discount can be applied to early bird registration pricing that runs through June 30th. Please visit apicsconference.org for more information and to register. This concludes today's APICS online event. Thank you for participating. All content and materials included in this APICS online event are the property of APICS and are protected by the United States and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved.